Welcome to today's episode of the Soul-u-tions Podcast. We're going to take a deep dive in looking at what it really feels like to live under the amount of pressure that we're placing on ourselves, under this internal pressure, and what we can do to relieve some of it. So enjoy the song, and I'll see you on the other side of the intro.
Einstein said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Most everyone in the world is solving their problems the wrong way. Our problems come from our thinking, and we can solve them with our thinking. So, whether you're at your lowest, just trying to grow, or whether you are trying to sustain growth over your lifetime, join us as we push the boundaries of our current thinking and redefine how we find Soul-u-tions.
The hope and the strength and the love and the smiles and the laughter of friends and family. Add it up, you'll find no limit to the possibilities.
Oh my goodness. It's so funny because as I'm recording this podcast, I totally messed up the intro into it. And that probably is a little bit of an exaggeration, but let's just say we had to take more than one take on it. And it still wasn't perfect. But somehow that was perfect for the topic of today's podcast, which is living under pressure, truly understanding and realizing how much internal pressure we place on ourselves, in addition to the external pressures that we feel in life. And learning how to discern the difference between the internal pressure that we place on ourselves and the external pressures. And what I'll say about this is I want you to think of external pressures as the pressures that you may or may not be able to control. Those are pressures. Maybe there are deadlines. Back when I was practicing law, there were deadlines triggered by the filing of a legal complaint. I had 30 days to answer that complaint, right? And then once the answer was filed, that triggered 6 months of discovery. And then that triggered the deadlines for filing motions and eventually for trying the case. And so there are certain external pressures which we may or may not have a lot of control over in moving them around. But then there are the internal pressures, and those are the pressures that we put on ourselves and how we think we should be performing in our roles and in our jobs and in our relationships. And these are the things that we do have so much more control over than we think that we do. And so while we tend to focus on our inability to control our external pressures, I want you to do a U-turn with me today and take a look at the internal pressures that you are creating for yourself. And here's the good news, my friends. Because you are creating them for yourselves, you alone can begin to release the pressure that you are putting on yourself. And when you do that, you will begin to live in a way that allows you to truly see more opportunity and create more love in the world. It's kind of funny because when I was writing this episode, there's that song, Under Pressure. If only I had a great singing voice, I'd sing it for you. But it was written by Queen and David Bowie, and it so captures this experience and this feeling of living under pressure. And the lyrics, I've looked them up here for you, but it says pressure, pushing down on me, pushing down on you, under pressure, splits a family in two, puts people on streets. Let the intelligence of those lyrics sink in here, the pressure that we feel in living our lives under the pressure that we create for ourselves with thinking thoughts like, you can't mess this up, you can't make a mistake. How that type of an internalized pressure system that you've created, like the true impact it has on your life and on anyone's life. It's the type of pressure that Bowie writes splits a family in two and puts people on the streets. That's why, you might lose your job or find yourself alone looking for things. And interestingly, at the end of the song, when the song's resolving itself, I guess, through providing an alternative way of living and looking at the world, it says, insanity laughs under pressure. Oh, here it is. Turned away from it all like a blind man. Turned away from living under pressure like a blind man. Keep coming up with love, but it's so slashed and torn. Why? Love. Insanity laughs. Under pressure, we're breaking. We can't give ourselves one more chance. Like, that's the way they sing it in the song. Like, we can't. It's a question. We can't give ourselves one more chance. We can't give love that one more chance. This is what I mean by the fact that you have control over the internal pressure that you're placing on yourself. When you think, I can't mess up, I can't get this thing wrong, you're missing the fact that actually, can't you just give yourself another chance if you get it wrong? I mean, you might get it wrong, but then you also might learn something and you might give yourself another chance. So the way this topic bubbled up for me and why I knew I wanted to talk to y'all about it and share it on the podcast today is I was coaching one of my one-on-one clients who's an amazing human, and she was talking about this internal pressure that she feels, and the result being that she feels somewhat paralyzed in her life because she feels so much pressure to do something with her life. Like this thought that we have, right? I've got to do something with my life that means something. Like we begin to layer pressure on ourselves for what is that? What is it that we're going to do? And when we took a look at that feeling of pressure and the thought being that I can't mess up, like she remembered having that thought in the 5th grade. Like she remembered thinking when she was in the 5th grade, which is like 10 years old, that I can't mess this thing up. I can't mess this up. Now, I can remember thinking that thought too at a very young age. And my guess is that if you're listening to this podcast, if you do just a quick check-in with yourself, do you ever remember a time when you didn't have that thought occur to you that I can't fail here, I can't mess up here, I can't get this wrong here? Now, I want you to take a moment to consider this. You started thinking this thought when you were in the 5th grade. And so let's say you're 10 and you fast forward and you're 40 like the client that I was working with is. So for 30 years, you have thought that thought, I can't mess up, or some version of it for 30 years, probably on a daily basis, on a conscious or unconscious level. So just truly let that sink in. It's like the idea of compound interest. I'm sure you have all been well schooled in the idea of compound interest, which is, if you put a penny in every day and then just keep depositing pennies in, and then the interest compounds, then that's how you end up, your retirement ends up working for you. Maybe one day you have $1 million. So I want you to think about that same concept of compound interest, but in terms of, instead of depositing a penny every day of your life, you're depositing this thought, I can't mess up. I can't get this thing wrong, every day for 30 years. And imagine like the compound nature of the pressure that builds up in your life over a 30-year period. And then if you're my age, and I just turned 57, you add another 20 years of compounding that thought on yourself. And truly think about the real life impact of that on your life. Like you're going through your day, not even realizing it, but the weight of the compound nature of the pressure that truly just builds up underneath our radar. We don't even realize that, think about a penny. Think, oh, what is a penny going to add up to every day on a daily basis? But the math is it adds up to a lot of money because of this law of compounding. So the same thing happens when we start to apply internal pressure. Now, we do it for a really good reason, because it works when you're in the 5th grade. It works. It helps you focus. It helps you do things, and you begin to slowly build up a portfolio of achievements that are reinforced by other people in the world. Like, oh, look at you. You got these amazing grades, and then you got into this great school, or you're the star of the musical or the play or the golf team, whatever it is. It works until it doesn't anymore. There's another law that comes into play here. It's called the law of diminishing returns. It works until it doesn't, and then it begins to drag you down, like it's a physics drag equation. So we're just talking math here. And I'll tell you how it showed up in a very real way for me in my life. When my son Brennan was, he had endured 4 bone marrow transplants, and we were back at home in Augusta after living at St. Jude for a while being 3.5 years. And he caught just a common cold. It was in October, cold and flu season had started. And that was enough to ignite this new immune system that he had in his body to say, there's something dangerous going on. And it put the immune system on high alert. And in a transplant patient, a stem cell transplant patient, what happens is that the blood product, the immune system flowing through their body, is not their own. It's what was transplanted into them. So in Brennan's case, he has my blood going through his body. there's a cold virus. It's like, okay, we've got to kill the cold virus. These little soldiers of the immune system go out. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, that's the lung DNA is different than our DNA in the blood. And it starts to see the lungs as foreign. It starts attacking them. And in order to kind of help a transplant patient through these situations, you give them drugs that suppress their immune system. So when we were back home and he had this flare up, the doctors and they weren't. It wasn't a pediatric transplant center, although the oncologists knew what they were doing. The nurses and the medical students didn't see this very much. The young residents and fellows, it wasn't something that they knew how to, that they didn't handle it on a day-to-day basis. And I've been in Memphis living through 4 transplants, and I had kind of picked up on like the kind of medicine that you give and the how you hang it, whether you give it in a pill form or in an IV form. All of this to say was I began to feel so much pressure that I was putting on myself, that I couldn't sleep in that room, that I had to be watching like where the medicine was, guarding him. Is he getting better? Is he getting worse? Like total state of what they call psychologically as hypervigilance. And we all do this. And you may be feeling this a lot, especially emerging from COVID. Like you feel like you're just a little bit on edge or you're hypervigilant about things. And in that, just take a situation that elevates your kind of sense of awareness, your fight, flight, or freeze response to this type of hypervigilance, and you layer it on top of this internalized thought system and pressure system. And it really creates a bone-crushing, soul-crushing, paralyzing way of living. And so as this was going on, I was doing some coaching work. I was training. I had already received my coaching certificate, and I went to go do some training with horses. Now, just stick with me. I know this is about internalized pressure, but I want to just give you these stories so that you can see how in an extreme case, the pressure builds within us to paralyze us to such a point. And it's such an extreme case that it seems like so very real and such an appropriate response. And I want to share that with you because I want you to be able to see that even in such an extreme case where it seems like an appropriate response, I want you to see how debilitating it was. So that then we can take that case and use it as evidence for yourself in your own life as to if Tara could begin to relieve some of the pressure in a true life and death situation, then perhaps I could build up some courage and trust in my own ability to just in tiny little increments, like almost like taking a penny outright, just taking a little pressure off, not a lot at a time, but just the equivalent of a penny a day. If I began to learn how to release my internal pressure system a little bit out of a time, then it will eventually, I will feel a sense of greater control by releasing the pressure, right? I will now no longer be in this state of living under the law of diminishing returns by the amount of pressure I'm putting on myself. I'll begin to return to maybe that 5th grade version of me where the pressure did work. But as the 37-year-old, 17, 27, 37, 47, 57, 67 and beyond version of me, it just isn't working anymore. So here I am. I'm I'm doing this crazy horse work in this crazy horse ring. And it's really remarkable because you stand in a ring with a horse and the coach invites you, says, this is your playground. You can do whatever you want to with the horse. You don't. The horse is not on a lead, so the horse is free, and you're free in the ring. It's like, what do you want the horse to do? Do you want to get it to canter? Do you want to get it to walk? Do you want to? And you just make a decision in your brain as to what you want the horse to do, and you start to move toward the horse with that intention. Your true leadership energy and skills, like when you're showing up with it, the horse will follow you because it's a herd animal, and that's what we do as herd animals. And so it shows you how you're relating to the other people in your life. So in this situation, I'd say, oh, I want the horse to run to my left. And I'd start to go to my left, and then I'd stop and look at the horse. And the horse would stop and look at me. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you didn't want to go to the left. And then I'd start to go to the right, and the horse would start to follow me to the right. And then I'd stop and I'd look at the horse, and the horse would stop and the horse would look at me. And this went on for a little bit. And the coach asked me, she goes, Tara, what's going on down there? Like you start going one way and then you stop, and then you start going another way, and then you stop. And it's like the horse is confused. The horse wants to follow you. What's going on with you? What are you thinking? And in that moment, this realization came over me, and I felt the tears come to the corner of my eyes and the choking of my voice. And it was just this realization of, I was thinking, if I make the wrong decision, if I make the wrong choice, he will die. Like had put so much pressure on myself as the mother of this child in this hospital room. And when, just so you know, like my husband's with my other kids and we're all quarantined and they can't come in there. So I'm really the only parent there. We can talk on the phone, but I'm just hyper vigilant in this hospital room. And I'm like, if I make the wrong decision, he will die. If I don't stay up and watch him all night long and see if this medicine is working and let the nurses know that he needs something else, that he will die. And I was in a hospital, and that was a risk of the procedure of the bone marrow transplant. It's a very, very real risk. And so I had internalized a sense of pressure and responsibility for myself in that situation that was exhausting me, and that was paralyzing me, and that was preventing me from stepping back, seeing a bigger picture, and seeing all the other people that were doing jobs and working toward the same solution. So the coach asked me in that moment, she said, do you have the power, Tara? And I was like, excuse me? She said, you're telling me that if you make the wrong decision, he will die. But do you have that power? Has God given you that amount of power and responsibility? And in that moment of truly listening to her question and considering the answer, there was a deep peace that washed over me, because I knew in that moment that was not my job, that only God could know when someone would live or die or have that kind of power. My only responsibility in the situation was to love him, to show up and to love him through it. Yes, to make decisions on his behalf that the medical experts could not make because they weren't his parents, but then it was to step back and allow them to do their jobs, to trust in the process. So going back to your life and going back to this particular client who was feeling this amount of pressure over what she wants to do with the next chapter of her life. And, this idea that I can't get it wrong, I can't mess this up, I have to get it right. Again, that strategy, might have been appropriate for a fifth grader who's going up in the kickball game and thinking I've got to kick the ball between second and third place in order to get everybody home. But she didn't have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of the compounding pressure of that building up in her life and the paralyzing nature of that. So what we want to do is begin to just bit by bit begin to notice when you're thinking thoughts like this. Just begin to notice for yourself, like, where do I think that I can't mess up in my life right now, today, where I am? Where does that thought show up for me? In what particular situation does it show up for me? And then I want you to ask yourself, what would happen if I did mess up here? I want you to go to the worst case scenario. Like, what would happen if you did mess up here? Okay, we're going to go back to the fifth grade kickball example. So I'm trying to kick it between, second and third base and getting it out in the outfield so people can run home. What if I don't get it there? Like, the worst case scenario would be I strike out and the next person comes up to kick a ball and they have an opportunity to do it. Or maybe I'm even the last person and the worst case scenario is we have to wait till our up again to do it. Or maybe we lose that whole game and we have to wait for the next game to try. But there's always another opportunity, right? Another up that you have in it. And I want you to bring that now into your current moment. So let's say you mess something up. Now what? What do you do? If it's at work, do you go to the people that you're working with and saying, hey, I missed this? Think about it. The earlier that you're able to do that, the earlier everybody else is going to be able to get around something and figure out a solution, and the more brains that are going to, get on it. If you're thinking, like in the case of, this particular client of mine, if you're thinking, gosh, I can't mess this up. This next step I have to make I have to have the right decision. I have to know the right thing. I have to have it all planned out. You can see that she's doing the exact thing that I was doing in that horse ring, which is like, I couldn't lead the horse in a direction to figure some things out. I was paralyzed. I wasn't moving the horse anywhere. I was going 2 steps one way back, 2 steps the other way back. We truly weren't getting any ground in the situation. The horse wasn't moving and I wasn't moving. So what if the worst case scenario isn't that you try and you mess up? What if the worst case scenario is that you never try at all? That you suffocate and you crush and crumble under the amount of pressure that you're putting on yourself? What if that's the worst case scenario? So just take a deep breath. Whenever you find yourself thinking this thought, I can't mess up, come back Breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth through that tiny straw-like breath as far as you can breathe. And then breathe in again. And breathe out again. And one more time. You can mess up. You need to mess up. We want you to mess up because we want you trying. We want you, especially if you're trying to figure out what it is that you want to do with this next chapter of your life. We want you trying things because you're going to get some information, feedback, data. You're going to figure out, I really don't like playing the fiddle. I really don't like writing all the time. I really don't like teaching. I've got another client who's out of school working, and she's thinking about getting a graduate degree. Like, her choices are going back to school now for a little bit or waiting till after she has children and her children go off to college and then going back to graduate school. And I'm like, when would you rather learn that this is a thing for you or this isn't the thing for you? Like, wouldn't you rather learn now so that you can kind of go in a different direction, pivot someplace else? So coming back to releasing the internal pressure, coming back to this question that that David Bowie so, brilliantly included in this song, Under Pressure. Can't we give ourselves one more chance? What if instead of, I can't mess this up, we replace that thought with, I can always give myself one more chance. There's always another chance. As long as there's another breath, there's another chance. So take this podcast and use it as a place to actively engage in your life. And anytime you begin to feel that sense of pressure build in you, I want you to remember this. This is internalized pressure. This is very real. It's the result of the law of the compounding nature of things. I can take a breath here. I can take a moment here, right? I can mess up. I don't want to mess up, but if I do mess up, I will figure it out and I will talk to other people and we'll come up with the next step. It isn't life or death. It isn't the end of the world. Will it be uncomfortable? Perhaps. Is it hard to admit to having messed up? Yes. But I want you to understand that the trade-off is continuing to build the internal pressure, continuing to live under the laws of the compounding nature of that pressure. So when you're trying to weigh the discomfort of just messing up or telling someone you messed something up and figuring something else out, I want you to weigh it against not getting out of the trap of living under this feeling of internalized pressure. So yes, it may be hard at first, but I promise you it will get easier and easier and easier. The alternative, however, is it's going to get harder and harder and harder if we don't change the way we begin to relate to ourselves and treat ourselves now that we're adults living in the adult world. So, one, you're living in the law of diminishing returns. The other, you're living in a world of possibilities, which just happens to be the theme song to this podcast. So I think that's my sign to wrap it up now. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate the you showing up and listening to this podcast. It touches me deeply. It keeps me coming back, thinking of new ideas and new topics to talk to you about. So remember, you can always go to my website, Tara Simkins, TaraSimkins.com. Get on my email list. You'll get a free masterclass that'll walk you through this evaluation process of how to release the internal pressure that you've got going in your life. And also, you're going to get emails from me, and you can always respond to those emails with, "Hey, Tara, could you talk more about this on your podcast?" It's such a simple thing to do. But if you're not on my email list, you're going to forget how to ask me these things. But if my email pops up in your inbox, you're going to be like, "Oh, yeah, I could use some help in this area." And all you have to do is respond to that email and tell me the area you need help in. And I'd love to do a podcast on it. All right, my friends, I hope you remember you can mess up, you can figure it out as long as you've got a breath. There's a way through it. There's always a solution. Until next time.
'Cause I ain't done living the life I'm meant to lead. And I ain't done loving the ones who cared for me. The hope and the strength and the love and the smiles and the laughter of friends and family. Add it up, you'll find no limit to the possibilities. The left and the right and some faith in the fight in your courage.